Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The house felt unusually quiet, almost suffocating, since Craig left for his business trip 2 days ago. I tried to distract myself with a book, but every sound seemed louder, echoing in the empty space. When the doorbell rang, I jumped, my heart pounding. Who would be visiting at this hour? I peeked through the window and saw Hader, Craig's best friend, standing on the porch, holding up a bottle of wine. We exchanged a brief smile before I hesitated, wondering why he'd come unannounced. Still, I opened the door. Surprise, Hader said, his grin widening. Thought you could use some company while Craig's away. I brought wine. Hader. This is unexpected, I said, stepping back to let him in. But sure, come in. He walked in, comfortable, almost too comfortable, and we settled in the living room. As he poured 2 glasses, I felt a wave of unease. We exchanged light conversation, catching up on small talk, but there was a tension I couldn't quite place. Then, Hader looked at me, his eyes more serious than usual. Must be strange having the house to yourself, he said, leaning back. I thought it'd be nice to keep you company. It's just a 2-week, I replied, avoiding his gaze. Craig will be back soon. Yeah, he said, but his voice was softer, more contemplative. But you look different. Maybe it's just me. I forced a smile, trying to steer the conversation away, but his words hung in the air. I took a sip of wine, feeling the warmth of it spread, hoping it would calm the nervous flutter in my stomach. Hader's visit felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. He'd never come over alone before, and yet here he was, sitting across from me, his eyes lingering a moment too long. We chatted for a bit longer, but the unease never left. As he got up to leave, he paused at the door, turning to face me. Jody, I'm glad I came tonight. Sometimes, it's good to talk. There was a hint of something in his voice, a suggestion that sent a shiver down my spine. I managed a polite goodbye, closing the door behind him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a thread pulled too tight. I stood there staring at the empty hallway, wondering what had just happened, and if I'd find any answers in the quiet house when he was gone. Days passed, and I tried to forget Hader's unexpected visit, but it lingered in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. I told myself it was just a friendly gesture, nothing more. Still, when he texted a few days later asking if he could drop by again, my pulse quickened. I hesitated before replying, but eventually agreed. Craig had always trusted Hader, and I didn't want to seem rude. That evening he'd arrived with the same easy smile, a different bottle of wine, and a casual "Hey Jody." I noticed how he seemed more at ease this time, as if he belonged there. I reminded myself that this was Craig's best friend, someone I'd known for years. Yet there was something different, something I couldn't put my finger on. We settled in the living room, and I decided to keep things light. So how's work? Still fighting fires at the office? I asked, trying to push aside the awkwardness. Always, Hader said, pouring the wine, but then his tone shifted. But let's not talk about that. I'd rather hear about you. You seem quieter than usual. I was caught off guard. I'm fine, just keeping busy, I said, forcing a smile. He studied me for a moment, and I felt exposed under his gaze. You don't have to pretend, Jody. I can tell when something's bothering you. My heart skipped a beat. There's nothing wrong, Hader, I replied a bit too quickly. All right, if you say so. He raised his glass, and I did the same, though my hand felt shaky. But if you ever need to talk, I'm here. There it was again, that hint of something deeper, something unspoken. We continued talking, and I tried to relax, but I could sense the tension building. At one point, he reached across to adjust the hem of the blanket draped over the sofa, his hand brushing against mine. It was an innocent gesture, but the brief touch sent a jolt through me. I quickly pulled my hand away, my cheeks flushing. Sorry, he said, though his eyes lingered on mine. I didn't mean to. It's fine, I interrupted, standing up. I think I should get some water. I needed a moment to breathe, to shake off the strange, electric feeling that had settled between us. I grabbed a glass from the kitchen, filling it slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, hoping it would drown out my thoughts. When I returned, Hader was still seated, but the atmosphere had changed. I'm not trying to make things awkward, he said quietly. But there's something here, isn't there? I froze, the glass slipping slightly in my hand. What do you mean? You know what I mean. He looked at me and I saw the same intensity in his eyes from that night. A look that felt like a question waiting to be answered. Maybe I shouldn't have come. The room felt stifling, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off and tell him he was imagining things, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak. Hater, I'm married. This, whatever you're implying, it can't happen. He nodded, but his expression was unreadable. I know, Jody. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I just can't help how I feel. For a moment, we just stood there, the distance between us feeling like a chasm. I knew I should tell them to leave, to end this before it spiraled out of control, but instead, I found myself caught in a painful, silent understanding. Finally, I managed to say, "It's late, Hyder. Maybe we should call it a night." "Yeah, maybe we should," he said, picking up his jacket. But before he left, he glanced back, and I saw a flicker of something, regret or perhaps longing. "Good night, Jody." As the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of relief and confusion. I knew I should tell Craig about this, but what would I even say? That his best friend was becoming too familiar? That I wasn't sure if I wanted him to stop. The days blurred into each other, but I couldn't shake the last conversation with Hader. I told myself it was over, that we'd set clear boundaries, but his words echoed in my mind, making me uneasy. Then, on a Thursday evening, when I was just settling down with a book, my phone buzzed with a message. "Heading your way. Thought we could talk." My heart dropped. I didn't even have time to respond before I heard the knock on the door. I hesitated, my mind racing with reasons to send him away, but I found myself opening the door instead. Hyder stood there, his expression serious. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded, though everything inside me screamed that this was a bad idea. He stepped inside, and I closed the door behind him, the click of the lock louder than usual in the quiet house. "What are you doing here, Hader?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About how this, whatever this is, can't happen." "I meant it," I said, folding my arms over my chest. "We're not having this conversation again." He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "I just need to know, Jody, do you feel anything for me? Even a little?" I froze, caught off guard by the directness of his question. "Hader, please. This isn't fair." "Maybe it's not," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "But I need to know, because if you don't, I'll walk away and you'll never hear from me again." "But if you do?" "What?" I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "What difference would it make? I'm married, Hyder. To your best friend." "I know." He took another step, and now there was barely a foot between us. And I hate myself for feeling this way, but I can't pretend it isn't there. I looked away, unable to face the intensity of his gaze. "You should go," I said, but my voice was barely a whisper. "Jody." He reached out and gently lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "If you tell me to leave, I will. But be honest with me, do you want me to?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, the air thick with everything we weren't supposed to say. I wanted to scream at him, to push him away, but instead, I just stood there, caught between my loyalty to Craig and the undeniable pull I felt towards Hyder. "I don't know," I whispered finally, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I don't know what I want." His hand dropped, and he took a step back, the hurt clear on his face. "That's all I needed to hear," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Jody. I should never have put you in this position." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you have to say anything?" "Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you without even trying," he replied, his eyes glistening. "But I see now that I already have." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he turned and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at me one last time. "Good night, Jody." I watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him, and felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I'd wanted him to go, hadn't I? So why did it feel like I'd just made a terrible mistake? I sank down onto the sofa, my hands trembling, knowing that whatever line we'd been dancing around had finally been crossed, and there was no going back. The weekend crept in, bringing with it a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I hadn't heard from Hyder since that night, and while a part of me was relieved, another part felt hollow, as if something important had been ripped away. Craig was coming home in 2 days, and I knew I had to sort out my thoughts before then. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony, staring into the dark sky. My mind replayed every conversation, every glance with Hader, trying to make sense of it all. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it made my chest tighten. Then my phone buzzed, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Hader. "Can we talk? Just one last time. I promise." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I should have ignored it, deleted it, but I found myself typing back. "Okay, tomorrow noon, at the park." The following day, I arrived at the park earlier than planned, hoping to clear my head. The crisp air did little to ease my anxiety. I saw him approaching from a distance, his shoulders slightly slumped, as if he carried the weight of our unspoken words. "Thanks for coming," he said, stopping a few feet away, as if unsure whether to come closer. "I know I promised to stay away, but I needed to see you." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, say what you need to say, Hader. Then this has to end." He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool air. "I'm not here to make things harder for you, Jody. I know what we have is complicated, but it's real. I felt it, and I think you did too." I looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "That doesn't matter. I'm married, and whatever this was, it has to stop. Craig, he's my husband. I made a commitment to him." "I understand that," he said, his voice softer now. "But what if things were different? What if—" "Stop," I interrupted, finally looking up. "We can't play this game. It's not fair to Craig, and it's not fair to us. I can't keep doing this, Hader." He nodded, a sad smile forming on his lips. "I knew you'd say that, but I had to hear it from you, not just guess it from silence." We stood there for a moment, the distance between us feeling wider than ever. "You're right," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to end this before it destroys everything." A lump formed in my throat, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Goodbye, Hader," I said, hoping it would be final this time. "Goodbye, Jody." His eyes lingered on mine for a second longer before he turned and walked away, his figure fading into the crowd. As I watched him disappear, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. I'd made my decision, but the cost of it would haunt me for a long time. Craig's return was supposed to bring comfort, a sense of normalcy that I desperately craved. Instead, it felt like a reckoning. As I waited at the airport, watching travelers reunite with their loved ones, I was acutely aware of how different everything had become. When Craig emerged from the gate, his smile as warm and easy as ever, I felt a jolt of guilt that nearly knocked the breath out of me. He hugged me, pulling me close, and for a moment I clung to him, wishing I could erase the last few days, wishing I could be the person he thought I was. But when he pulled back, his eyes searching mine, I knew he sensed something had shifted. The drive home was quiet, the usual chatter about his trip, and the people he'd met reduced to mere polite exchanges. I could see him glancing at me every now and then, his brow slightly furrowed, but he didn't push. Not yet. That night, as we sat on the couch, Craig finally spoke up. "Jody, is everything okay? You seem distant." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "I'm fine," I said too quickly, the words sounding hollow. "It's just been a long week." He reached out, his hand warm on mine. "I know, I missed you." I forced a smile, but I felt it crack at the edges. "I missed you too," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We sat there in silence for a while, and I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me. I wanted to tell him to come clean about Hader, but what would I say? That his best friend had been a distraction? That I had let myself be drawn into something dangerous, even if nothing physical had happened? Craig's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He glanced at it, his expression changing as he read the message. "It's Hader," he said, looking up at me. "He's asking if we're free this weekend, maybe we could all grab dinner." I froze, a cold shiver running through me. "No," I said, too sharply. "I don't think that's a good idea." Craig frowned, clearly surprised by my reaction. "Why not? Did something happen between you two?" My mind raced, searching for a way to explain without revealing too much. "No, it's just, I think we need some time, just the two of us, to reconnect." Craig's expression softened, and he squeezed my hand. "I'd like that," he said, and I felt a pang of relief. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. The real test would be seeing Hyder again, knowing that things could never go back to how they were. And as much as I wanted to pretend otherwise, I was no longer the same person I had been when Craig left. The boundaries I thought were solid had blurred, and now I had to face the consequences, even if it meant keeping secrets from the one person I had vowed to be honest with. As Craig settled beside me, his arm draped casually over my shoulder, I tried to focus on the warmth of his presence, on the familiar comfort that had once been enough. But my mind kept drifting, haunted by memories of Hyder's lingering gaze. The way his words had stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. I wanted to believe that I could keep my feelings in check, that I could push them down and bury them deep enough to forget. But how long could I really keep pretending? If Craig's business trips became more frequent, if I was left alone with my thoughts, with those brief, intoxicating moments replaying in my head, could I still resist the pull? I wasn't ironclad. The cracks had already started to show, and I was afraid that one more week, one more night alone might be all it would take for everything to shatter. I glanced at Craig, his eyes closed, breathing even and steady. He trusted me. And that trust was the only thing keeping me grounded, the only thing reminding me who I was and what I stood to lose. How much longer could I hold on? And if I let go, would there be anything left to save?